Hello, every pony. Scar89 here, once again, with another very festive fanfiction reading. Today, I'm going to be reading Our Gifts by The Descendant. Hope you get yourselves all toasty warmed up with some hot cocoa or some nice warm cider. And let's begin. Our Gifts, Chapter 1, Hearth Warming Eve. Our Gifts. Written by The Descendant. Cover art by Anne Hairball. Chapter 1, Hearth Warming Eve. Twilight Sparkle was feeling, in all honesty, just a little bit giddy. Just a little bit, though. Just giddy enough to go bounding into her childhood bedroom and spring herself upon the bed. Seeing as how she was now no longer a little filly, she tumbled straight across it and landed on the floor in a heap. Within moments, there were a familiar sound of clawed feet at her doorway, and as she tossed amid the piles of her sheet and comforter, Twilight heard a little voice call for her. I don't know who's saying this, but... Okay, sorry. Twilight heard a little voice call for her. Okay. Twilight! Called a familiar tone. Twilight! You came in here, right? She peered over the edge of the bed. Spike stood at the door, panning his eyes back and forth across the room. His eyebrow arched, and he saw her peeking back at him from amid the mess. What'd you do, Twy? How'd you end up over there? The little dragon jogged across the room as he jumped up on the bed and carefully balanced his candy cane so that its sticky sweetness didn't touch her sheets. He reached down with his free hand, offering it to help her out of the pile. Twice Sparkle, though, was feeling, in all honesty, just a little bit giddy. She reached her neck forward toward his hand and stuck her tongue out toward his candy cane. Twy, he called, drawing it back as her tongue came closer. Hey, if you want some, She jumped upon the bed, fixing him with a mischievous smirk. I'm gonna get your candy cane, Spike, she whispered. Uh-oh, he called, and in one smooth motion, he rolled off the bed and began to pelt across the room. Gonna get it, she called, barely hiding the laughter in her voice. Even as Spike scampered across, his voice, too, began to betray giggles, and the song makes no sense to what I'm reading whatsoever. I'm sorry, it's on a loop, or it's on a continuous cycle of one song after another, so I'm sorry for this weird song for this giddy time. So anyway, even as Spike scampered away, his voice too began to betray giggles. He knew Twilight. He knew her better than perhaps anyone else in the world. If she were truly trying to take his peppermint prize, then a snap of her magic would already have claimed it. No, he realized as he began to laugh, she was just playing at a little chase game. She was just happy, just playing with him, and that made him happy. So, around her childhood bedroom they went, their laughter only interrupted by her calls of falsified greed and his reply to the contrary. They went past the rocking chair where her Nana had sat and rocked her when she'd first come home from the hospital as a newborn. They went past the toy chest where Shining had hid her when one of her first magic spells had gone wrong. She remembered listening as he had taken the blame for the fire, cataclysm, and invasion of small rodents. They went pelting past the old wind-up alarm clock that had woken her each morning. Immediately, she began practicing her spells so that she could enter magic kindergarten for the school for gifted unicorns. They went past a little crib, the one where she had laid a dragon whelp. As they pelted past, she recalled the first time that her family had brought him to stay with them on the weekends when she was home from school. They went past all these things and spoke of her childhood. They went past all these things that spoke of her childhood. And then they went past them again, and again, and yet again. Twy! He called through a fit of giggles, trying to get her to end their long elliptical orbit of the room. At once she was upon him, and as she pressed him gently against the window sill, she snapped her teeth first on one side of his head and then the other, making large comical bite sounds. Nom, she said, leaning against his back. Her face touched against his right cheek and then his left, playfully trying to claim the candy cane and cheerfully keeping from doing just that. Twy! He called through his giggles, moving the candy cane from side to side to keep it out of her reach. If you want some of my candy cane, just ask! Just ask! She sat there, giving a few chuckles, and simply rested her head against his. Twilight Sparkle was feeling, in all honesty, just a little bit giddy. And who wouldn't? It was Hearth Warming Eve, and her childhood home was now filled with those she loved the most. From the hallway came the sound of her parents, her brothers, and her sister-in-law, all wishing one another a good night, before her and the little dragon sat scrunched up in a happy ball as she held him close. Twilight Sparkle was just a little bit giddy, just like a little filly that had once lived in this room had been on Hearthwarming more than a decade ago, when she prepared her little dragon finger fingerling for bed. I'm not sure what that word is. Spike? She asked as a broad smile fell over her face. She lifted her head and peered down at him from above. May I please have a lick of your candy cane? Sure, Twy, he said as he leapt up to the broad windowsill. He patted it, motioning for her to come near, and she too sat in the wide window. Together they sat there as Spike munched and crunched happily on the candy cane, lifting it to her so that she could take little licks. As they did, they looked out the window to Canterlot beyond. The city was bathed in hearth-warming colors. The tall spires of the palace were highlighted in floodlights, and beneath them the city itself seemed to glow in a peaceful light as 1,000 upon thousands of buildings sat bestrewn with lights and candles, each one adding to the radiance of the night. A gentle snow sat drifting about the royal city as the Pegasi made sure that it was all picturesque and tranquil. Spike scooted across the windowsill and leaned against her. He settled against her flanks as he fought to undo the rest of the wrapping from the candy cane. Her magic came alight, undoing the rest for him, stealing another lick, and then placing it back in his claws. He smiled up to her in thanks, and the two looked out the window at the city for quite some time. The taste of peppermint lingered on her tongue as the snow drifted in the tiny currents, and their breaths steamed the windows, making the lights beyond disappear into a misty blend of colors. Spike suddenly felt a soft feeling go through him, and then there was a noise that made him jump. "Come on, Spike," she said. "Let's get washed up for bed." In mere moments, another raspberry fell through him, and he leapt from the window sill at Twilight as Twilight shepherded him along toward the bedroom. He leapt with a small laugh with each one that she placed against his neck and cheeks. "Twy!" he called again, giggling as he sped up to stay ahead of her. "What in the world's gotten into you tonight?" Twilight Sparkle was giddy. She was happy. Shouldn't she be? It was Hearthwarming Eve, and those who meant the most to her were gathered in the home where she had grown up. A short time later, she flopped back on the bed, this time being careful to avoid the plunge off the other side. She had washed the candy cane stickiness from her little dragon. Now he sorted through their belongings in the saddlebag nearby, returning toiletries that they had brought from Ponyville. The taste of her toothpaste battled with the remains of the candy cane's flavor in her mouth, and she smacked her lips to try to be rid of it. Her eyes fell across her dresser. A ceramic hearth-warming tree stood there, the little crystal ornaments catching the magical light from within. The colors that rose from it danced across her ceiling, and once again Twilight felt like a little filly. She remembered her Nana giving her that tree, one that the talented mare had made herself. Now she once more lay in this bed, and once more she felt the colors of it aiding her anticipation for the day to come. "Spike," she said softly, as she heard him trying to lay in his old crib. "I have the most unusual feeling. I feel like I'm a little full again. I feel like it's old times." There was a momentary silence. "Yeah?" he said, his voice a shadow of sardonicism. I don't know. "I suppose I can see why you'd feel that way. I can't really say that I feel the same, I guess." Twilight lifted her head and peered toward where he lay at the foot of her bed. The sight of him brought another giggle from the unicorn. Spark's arms and legs lay splayed out over the edge of the crib. His tail swished back and forth, denoting how uncomfortable he was, and his head hung over the head of the bed as well. In short, the dragon was entirely too big for a crib he had used. He has used. Sorry, the dragon was entirely too big for a crib he had used last a few scant years ago. Twilight chuckled to herself and lit her horn. Very well, if they couldn't go back to when Spike was old enough to sleep in his own crib, then they'd have to go back to time just slightly before that. At once, Spike and his blankets were lifted from the crib, and he was momentarily startled, as there were few feelings in the world as familiar to him as Twilight's magic. To him, it was as comfortable and familiar as the blankets she now wrapped him in. The old one that they'd brought up from Ponyville. Oh, his old one that they'd brought up from Ponyville. The whelp was only slightly surprised when he realized where it was bringing her. Shouldn't be him. I don't know. Really, Twi? He asked, looking on as she guided him toward her. Are you gonna have enough room? It's going to be a little. It's going to be a little cozy, she said, shifting to the side as she settled the little dragon atop the bed, wrapping him tighter. But, well, it will be cozy. Hearth Warming Eve, Twi, he said, reaching an arm out to her. Happy Hearth Warming Eve, Twi, he said, reaching an arm out to her. Happy Hearth Warming Eve, Spike, she said, reaching out to him through the top of her sheet and comfort her, pressing a hug into him from above. Are you happy you came home for it? She lifted her forelegs off of him, and I don't know. I can't read right now. And as she did, she looked down to see his emerald eyes looking back up at her. He blinked a few times and then simply said, "Home?" Twilight arched an eyebrow and watched as he pulled the blanket back over himself. He muttered something under his breath as he did, and she failed to catch it. Still, he soon disappeared into the blankets. There was the slight feel of him leaning closer to her, and then he was asleep. She looked down at him, or at least the blanket-covered lump that he was, until the shallow breathing started. Twilight smiled. She turned her body gently so that it would not disturb the sleeper who rested on the other side of her comfortable. After a moment, she found a position that let her rest comfortably, more or less. She found that she could still see the ceramic hearth-warming tree that her Nana had made her. As she studied the colors, she felt that giddy, happy sensation one more time. Twilight snuggled down into her blankets, as happily anticipating a waking to hearth-warming day as she had when she was still a little foal. No, that wasn't quite right. She was still giddy with the thought of waking up tomorrow, but it was for other reasons. She was a young adult now, mostly, and her reasons for anticipating tomorrow were rather different. She and Spike had planned everything so carefully, and their long lists of all of their friends had carefully been filled with the best presents that they could find. She felt a smile across her face as she imagined the girls waking in Ponyville far below and out across the valley. She imagined the delighted squeals of Rarity and Pinkie Pie, the small gasp of anticipation that Fluttershy would give, and the hearty cheers of Dash and Applejack. Their gifts had been perfect. They were sure of it. She imagined the princesses giving their greetings to their courts as they made for their private chambers. There, before the great hearth-warming tree that only they and their closest confidants ever gazed upon, they would find the silver package that she and Spike had left for them. Twilight giggled at the thought of the princess marveling at the gifts, and was very proud that she and her little dragon had found the perfect present for supposedly immortal beings, something that they alone in all Equestria knew that the sisters did not own. They had found the perfect gifts for ponies that owned and had seen essentially everything. She giggled once more, silencing herself to keep from waking Spike. She was an adult now, sort of, and her joy was in seeing her closest loved ones be filled with happiness as their presents were revealed to them. Oh, how they had listened. How they had picked up on every little detail and every note for months. Together, she and Spike had found gifts for her parents, for Cadence and Shining. They had literally danced together up and down store aisles as the ideal presents lay sitting there before them. None, now these, sorry, now these presents lay under the Hearth Warming tree in the living room below, sparkling beneath the magical lights that were left blazing as they all retired for the night. More presents lay there too. She could just barely make out the lump on the bed, the blankets still rising and falling with the deep breaths of her little dragon. Her face was starting to hurt from all the smiling, but this last one was worth it. How secretive and sneaky she'd been, proving all of her friends with hints after hint, or even outright information about all the things she could have. How careful she'd been to gauge each against the part that dwelt inside her, that dwelt inside of him. Some of this is weirded words, worded wrong or weird. Sorry. Yes, she planned it perfectly. She'd made up a list of things that she knew beyond a doubt would not launch him into another fit of greed growth. Okay, so he was talking about him. Okay, but about Spike. It was essentially perfect. Yes, the list had been very short, but in the end, her family and friends were each going to give Spike a very happy day tomorrow. How he'd be so astounded to finally have a Hearth Warming where they could all give him presents, where they were free to give him more than just candies and books. How amazed he'd be by their own gifts. The one that oh, Buck. Twilight bolted straight up in bed. Her eyes flew to the saddlebags, and at once she leapt from the bed, sending the sleeping whelp tumbling from it with a surprised cry. "Jeez, Twi!" he said. He said as he spun about in the blankets. When he freed himself, Spike looked up to see her digging through the saddlebags. She tossed an item to the floor, searching for something deep within. "Ugh," he moaned, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "I'm gonna have to clean all this up again, aren't I?" Twilight barely heard him. Instead, she dug out a ledger, one that she had been using to keep careful tabs on all that they had done as they prepared for the holiday. Her magic flipped through the ledger. She turned past pages where they had scientifically accounted for the exact amount of eggnog necessary to obtain merriment. Only you, Twi, only you. And where they had studiously accounted for the right amount of snow-white berries necessary in a spring of mistletoe to induce a kiss. Really, Twi? Really? You're so weird with the Shining and Cadence thing. I know that's what she used it for. Rarity had been happy to volunteer, despite Spike passing out after the 3rd, 5th, and 7th attempts to obtain a control level. "Twi?" Spike said, holding a finger in the air. "Is everything okay?" One of Twilight's bangs sprung upon her head, springing into the air with a metallic twang. "Uh-oh," said Spike as he wrapped himself in his blankets, hiding in it so that that only his emerald eyes shone out from beneath. "That's not good. That's never good." Peering over the ledger, Twilight stopped at the long list of names, each written in her secret encryption. There, each one sat crossed out, and a tally of numbers of presents provided, cost, and location of the return receipt sat next to each one, all except one. All except one that she, it seemed, had forgotten. Twilight danced her hooves, and she spun to face the alarm clock that stood at the bedstand. It was 10:32 p.m. on Hearth Warming Eve, and she had no present for Twi. "What's up? What's the matter? What's the matter, Twi? Are you okay?" Spike said, peeking out from beneath his blanket. Spike, perhaps better than any living creature in the world, knew what it meant when she was like this. In his head, he was already imagining where her hysterics would lead. Explosions, fires, perhaps she'd even keep with the festive season and indulge the city with fruitcakes. Oh, deluge the city with fruitcakes. Not indulge, sorry. But as she turned to him, Spike saw something that he had not expected. When he saw what was when he saw was not his caregiver about to go off into another one of her fits of hysteria. Instead, in many ways, what he saw was worse. "Twy!" he exclaimed, leaping out of his blankets, the dragon trying to reach up to her, to wipe away the tears that were forming in the corners of her eyes. Suddenly, Twilight was no longer giddy. She was no longer happy. She drew her face along his, and then wrapped him in her magic. In an instant, they were pelting down the hallway. In all honesty, Twilight's parents were thrilled to know that their children were in the house. They loved knowing that Twilight and Shining were back in their bedrooms, and that the ghosts of Hearth's warming eves they'd thought gone from their lives was once more sitting around their charming home. They were very glad that all of their children were here, all four of them. That Cadence was here meant that there would be somehow more complete. Yes, having an alicorn princess in one home was unusual, but that was mitigated by family photo albums that showed the aforementioned alicorn as a full sitter, one bestrewn with peanut butter and jelly as she attempted to give a little filly and dragon fingerling a bath. She was their daughter by law now, just as their son was that of the neighbors who they honored. And they were very happy of it, or for it. I'm getting a little confused now. That Spike was here completed it. He was the last of the children to enter his home, and at first they had been dubious. But they had spent the first weekends just trying to figure out what he ate and reminding each other not to scold him like a puppy when he was naughty. Years later, they could barely picture a time without him. When the time came for Twilight to take him to live with her at her new apartment at the school, they had bawled almost as hard as they had when Shining and Twilight had left their homes. Yes, it felt good to have the kids all home. It felt wonderful, and they had begged that the fates would let it happen. They did their best to remind themselves of that as one of their children sat banging on their bedroom door, jarring them out of their sleep and making Twilight's father fall from the bed. As he grumpily stood, he mumbled something indelicate, and then opened the door. He immediately had a very surprised-looking dragon whelp pressed into his face. "Dad, talk with Spike for a little bit," called his daughter, rushing past him, dropping Spike across his facade. "Mom, mommy, mom," Twilight called. Sorry, my voice kind of cracked there, so it didn't get very loud. "Mom, mommy, mom," Twilight called, bouncing up and down on her mother's side of the bed. "Twilight?" answered her mother blurrily. "Dear, what's wrong?" Twilight's mother had very little time to ponder any of this, as her daughter shoved her toward the door so forcibly and powerfully that their rear legs came off the ground. Or that her rear legs came off the ground, sorry. "We're getting too old for this," she whispered to her husband with a sigh, and with that their daughter slammed the door shut behind them. Spike blinked and rubbed his hand across his frills. He then looked up into the impassive glare of the stallion. "Hi, Mr. Dad," called Spike in a tone that was far too cheerful to match the hour. "She's right," the stallion answered. "We are getting too old for this." "Yeah," answered Spike in an innocent tone. "You are starting to get some gray in your mane, especially at the temples," the stallion arched an eye at the little dragon that he held in his foreleg. "What?" Outside, a whispered conversation drew toward an obvious conclusion. "I'm sorry, dear," Twilight's mother told her, looking down into the watering vision of her little filly. "But with how strict and clear your list was, we had difficulty finding the one gift at all. I'm so sorry, dear, but we only have the one. Do you want it?" "No," brayed Twilight as quietly as she could. I don't want what you and Dad got for him. You deserve to give it to him. I, I want. You deserve to give it to him. I, I want something to give him myself. Oh, how could I have forgotten? She leaned her head across her mother's shoulders. Two large sniffles arose from the unicorn as her mother held her in the two, held her, and the two swayed back and forth. You'll just have to be honest with him. That's all there is to it, Twilight, her mother said. Though I'd check with Candid and Shiny first. Twilight stood upright, and a sudden look of hope shot across her. Yes, maybe her brother and the two mares suddenly bolted in place, and the two mares suddenly bolted in place, and their faces turned back toward the door of the master bedroom. Loud voices arose from within. With surprise on their faces, they threw the door open, not knowing what to expect, neither guessing what could cause such a ruckus. Seeing as they had left two males in a room together, it very clearly became clear that they were what they were arguing about. I don't know. Okay. Hey, Ton Manning! Exclaimed Spike, driving his finger into the palm of his other hand. He's just gonna bolt from the Broncos like he did from the Colts. His father pounded his hoof on the bed. Yeah, like your Colt Drew Brees is some kind of saint. Who, are you two really arguing about hoofball at 11 o'clock on Hearth Warming Eve? Interrupted Twilight, as both she and her mother looked upon them with falsified judgment. The two males looked at one another, back to the mares, and shrugged their shoulders. Come on, Spike, Twilight said as her voice deflated again, and she raised her hoof to him. We have to make another stop. Spike raised his hand again, but before he could ask what this was all about, he felt himself gathered into a strong set of forelegs, probably the only stallion's forelegs in the world where he felt truly comfortable. It began as a noogie, but soon it became a bear hug, one he tried to return. Good night, Spike. Happy Hearth Warming Eve. Good night, Mr. Dad. Happy Hearth Warming Eve, Happy Hearth Warming. He was past to Twilight's mother, and he lingered in her gentle hug for a long moment before she softly kissed the top of his head. Happy Hearth Warming, Spike dear. Happy Hearth Warming, Mrs. Mom. He had expected Twilight to grab him with a waft of her magic. To his surprise, they departed the room, with Twilight carrying him in one of her forelegs, a way she'd not carried him for years, perhaps nearly a decade. Twi? He asked in confusion. The word and the question it implied lingered around the hallway before fading away. Twilight's mother quietly closed the door. What was all that about? Asked her father, reaching up his hoof to guide his mare back to the close, warm folds of their bed. When she told him, he sighed heavily. There was a momentary silence as they settled together once again. You sent her off to Shining's room, right? Of course, she said, tucking herself close to him. Why should we have all the fun of being awoken at this time of night? That's my girl, he said, and with that he wrapped her in his forelegs, kissed her ears, and settled around her as the snow fell gently outside their window. Shining Armor wasn't a complicated stallion. He wasn't that deep, and intellectually speaking, he knew he wasn't the top shelf model. He had always known what he wanted, though, and his single-minded drive had won him many things. Well, it did give him a princess, so I guess that's true. He had wanted to be a dutiful soldier. He wanted to achieve all that he was meant for, and since the day he'd first realized his feelings for his babysitter's full sitter, he'd wanted her in this bed. Now, a decade later, and their marriage all properly arranged and behind them, he completed the trifecta. Sorry, I forgot that word for a second. It wasn't exactly as he'd imagined it. In fact, it was ridiculous. The bed was so small with the two grown ponies, a large stallion and the alicorn mare had to press close to one another. Hey, I don't think he's complaining, by the way. She had to tuck herself deep into the crux of his body, and he had to lay her head upon his neck, making it so that every little movement of the two drew their faces along that of the other. Hey, just saying. He's not complaining. Thanks, Celestia, for ridiculousness. Ever on the alert, the captain and prince raised his head as sounds lifted from the end of the hallway beyond his bedroom door. He listened as a door slammed, and the familiar voices of Twilight and his mother came down the hall to him in muffled tones. Pillow? Asked Cadence in a tired voice. Would you please rest your head once more? You make a wonderful shining armor. She got the word mixed up because she's tired. He put a soft kiss upon her forehead and then lifted his ears once again. It was definitely a conversation, and not a happy one. He wondered what the two in the hallway could be talking about at this hour. He was distracted as a certain alicorn princess began to nibble softly upon his neck. I'm sorry that you got awoken, babe, he said as her tender administrations continued. There's something up in the hallway. I'm just listening to see if they are going to need my help or not. If I hear Dad get up and fetch his toolbox from under the sink... Tomorrow night, when we stay with my parents, I suggest that we will have no such issues to deal with, she said, wrapping her face along his neck. Tomorrow we'll have the exact same situation, he said with a laugh, except that it will be in your full hood bed instead of mine. Cadence wasn't a complicated mare. She wasn't that deep, and intellectually speaking, she knew she wasn't the top-shelf model. She had always known what she wanted, though, and her single-minded drive had won her many things. Sorry, it's just so repetitive after a while. She had wanted to be a dutiful princess. She wanted to achieve all that she was meant for. And since the day she'd first realized her feelings for the brother of her favorite filly, she'd wanted him in her bed in the house next door. It seemed to some small kernel part of her that she would now be completing the trifecta. Babe, he said with a small laugh, if you don't stop wriggling like that, then we're gonna have another guest in this bed. One who'll need a nice warm place to spend the night. Cadence giggled, shifted her hips, and with that, their door flung open and Spike was dropped between them. My, said Candace in a rather disappointed tone, this is not what I thought you were referring to at all. It wasn't, hissed Shining as one of the males who had just interrupted at the very edge of some rather sweaty snuggle bunnies could be. Sweaty snuggle. What? Twilight, what's up with that? Shining looked up to see that Twilight's hair was a mess, and a look of subdued hysteria was sitting across her face. Uh-oh, he said, looking down at Spike with startled alarm. This is never good, dude. This is never good. I know, right? Replied Spike, staring from one of the sovereigns of the Crystal Empire to the other as confusion swept over them. Something's really got her tail in a twist tonight. Don't know what, though. Twilight, what in the well is... began the older brother. At once, a great arc of her magic settled over him. All in the room were suddenly reminded of which of the two siblings had once impressed a supposedly immortal and seemingly divine alicorn with her massive raw magical abilities. That was a long one-on sentence, I think. Twilight began to drag Shining from the bed, and as she did, he turned around and tried to gather the sheets into his hooves. Not good, dude. Not good, dude. Not good, he said, looking up to Spike with noticeable concerns as he was dragged away. I know, bro. Believe me, I know, Spike called, dancing upon the bed and waving his arms about frantically. Uh-oh. Try to go limp, bro. Go limp! Oh, sorry. Tell my wife I love her, dude, Shining called, reaching his foreleg toward the bed and its occupants. At once the moonlight showed him spin around to look upon the form of his younger sister. A slight cry escaped him as the door slammed shut. Spike stood upon the bed, running his clawed hands through his frills. Again. He sat upon a pillow, watching the door. When no blood-curdling cries of horror reached out from behind it, he turned to face the Crystal Princess. "Hey, Cadence," he said. She smiled down at him, remembering the little dragon fingerling that had fallen asleep in her lap time and time again as Twilight had studied nearby. "Yes, yes, Spike?" She answered. Shining said, well, kind of screamed. Uh, Shining said, well, kind of screamed that he loves you. Just so you know, he said, just in case you missed it or something. She gave a single giggle and then looked back down at him. "Yes," she said, lifting her forelegs. "I love him too. I love him so very much." With that, she wrapped her foreleg around the little dragon, embracing him closer as she giggled. Together they lay there upon the bed, Cadence simply giggling happily at the absurdity of it all as Spike's eyes sat wide. "Whoa," he breathed. When Shining had been dragged into the hallway, he neither expected to find Twilight wrapped in currents of black magic or grinning maniacally. He wasn't sure which he'd rather have faced. In reality, he stood up to discover himself looking down into the watering eyes of his little sister. At once, all of his upset washed away, and this part of him that was a big brother came marching up to the forefront. She sat up. Oh, sat up. I don't know what's wrong with me tonight. And that part of him that was a big brother came marching up to the forefront, set up base camp, and began launching catapults full of love and concern. "Twilight, what's wrong? Why are you so upset, sis? It's almost 11 o'clock, and you're..." Twilight interrupted him with the whispered remark. He took his head and looked down at her once again. "Nothing?" She shook her head. More whispered words fell from his little sister, and as they did, Shining did his best to think tactically, like a real captain of the guard. In short, he ended up saying practically the same thing that his mother had. Sorry. "No, Twilight, we don't. We only have the one gift, the one you suggested. I'm sorry, it wasn't easy to find anything else. You know, what with how strict your list was and what he could and couldn't have. I'm sorry, Twilight." He watched her head sink. Sorry. He watched her head sink. As it did, his mind raced to find a way to help his baby sister. I could send a message to the quartermaster, Depot. I don't know why I can't pronounce that word correctly. Some ponies should be on duty. We could search through a catalog, and I could start the requisition process." "Process?" she said, her eyes coming alight. "How long would that take?" Shining's head sank low. 4 to 6 weeks. It's a bureaucracy, after all. Twilight cursed. He lifted her head and placed it across his shoulder. Just tell him the truth, Twi," he implored her. "He'll understand. He's always been a great little guy about stuff like that." I shouldn't have to tell him anything," she whimpered. "I should have checked twice. I just got so wrapped up. He's been through so much this year. I've... Shh," he whispered as he rocked his baby sister. "Twilight, shh. It'll be okay. Everything's gonna be fine." The door came open, and Shining walked back towards his bed. "Dude," he said, hovering his face over the little dragon, pretending to be incensed by what he discovered there. "Love you like a bro, but get up out of my bed and away from my mare." He's sleeping, Shining," Cadence exhorted. The return of the words of the darkened bedroom brought Spike out of his slumber. As it did, he lifted his arms, searching through the darkness. In an instant, he was caught in that familiar magic, and soon he felt himself settle across Twilight's back. Her familiar scent caught in his nose, and the soft wafts of her mane rested beneath his cheek. He brushed his hand through her mane. He brushed his hand through her mane once, and in an instant he was slumbering against her. Twilight craned her neck to look at him. He looked extraordinarily peaceful. With that, or what with the way his little breasts were catching amid her mane. She lifted her head with a tiny smirk, and as she did, she imparted her meaning to the two who were attempting to make room for one another upon the bed again. And how long before you two have a little one or little ones to carry around? Her smirk told them. You'd be an aunt a lot sooner, their smirks replied, if you'd close the bucking door. Really? Really? Good night, you two, she said with a giggle, closing the door in a waft of her magic. Sorry to wake you. Happy hearth warming. Happy hearth warming, Twilight. Happy hearth warming, Twilight. Happy hearth warming, sis.